Before we get started, you need to know that most of what we're going to be talking about here occurred in the 1500s, in the early 1500s. And of course, this is AD, or as I said in some of the other lectures, sometimes you'll see CE. All right, so also, many of you may be Catholic, or you may be Protestant, or you may belong to another religion. I grew up Catholic. All right. In fact, there was even a time that I thought about being a priest. I thought God wanted me to be a priest. I didn't want to be a priest. I just thought God wanted me to be a priest, and that didn't happen. And I'm glad it didn't happen. But nonetheless, I wanted y'all to know that I grew up Catholic, and so when I talk about these things, remember, I'm not putting down the Catholic Church. Okay, we're just talking about history here, and like many institutions, especially when any institution monopolizes power, they tend to become corrupt, whether they're political institutions, whether they are religious institutions, it doesn't matter. I mean, historically, that's what we see. And the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, in the 1400s, in the 1500s, became increasingly corrupt. And what do I mean by corrupt? Well, for example, you would have monks or priests that would go around and do, sell phony relics, for example, to poor people. And they would just get a piece of wood and say that this was a part of the cross that Jesus died upon. All right, and this was in order to make what? Money. It's not I guess it's not a very good money sign here. Um, among the other things that we see at that time was that the Roman Catholic Church was selling indulgences. And what this meant was that you could buy an indulgence, or in other words, you pay the church money, and if you had a friend or a family member that died, all right, this would quicken, all right, or hasten their way to heaven. Remember, Catholics believed and still believe today in purgatory, although it's and they still even to some in a much different way believe in indulgences, but not in the same way. So we're not going to get into that. But purgatory is kind of really started. The doctrine of purgatory started. I'm not sure exactly when, but basically when infants would be were born and they were not baptized, and then they would die. And so the church said, well, what happens? Well, they wouldn't go straight to heaven because, as you know, according to Christian doctrine, everyone is born with sin. And so they said, well, maybe they go to purgatory, and from there they're purged. All right, they're cleansed. Kind of like when you purge crawfish, and so they're cleansed, and then they can enter heaven. And so let's say someone dies that was a good person, but they die with a sin on their soul, but it's not a sin that would send them to eternal damnation. They go to purgatory, and from there they're cleansed. The thing is that purgatory is not necessarily pleasant. Okay, it's kind of like maybe teaching middle school or something. So if you buy an indulgence, you could hasten um, or I should say shorten one's time in purgatory and hasten their way to heaven. And so this was abused, especially in Germany. When I say abused, I mean people would go around and sell these indulgences in order to make the church money. And this was especially prevalent in what today is Germany. Now remember, back then there was no such thing as Germany. It was actually called the Holy Roman Empire, which is funny because it was not really Roman and it wasn't really holy either. And a famous um, indulgence salesman was a guy by the name of Johann Tetzel. It's a very important figure in history. Now, I know all of this seems like it's not American history, but trust me, when you put it all together, you'll understand why. Um, we're talking about this. It's very important on several accounts. In fact, I want y'all to really study this. This is not in the textbook. They just have mentioned it a little bit, but make sure that you read a little bit more about it if you can find some material, and also understand the lecture here. Here's a picture of old Johann here. Um, Looks like maybe he should have gone on a diet, but anyway. And now we're going to talk a little bit about Martin Luther. Okay, now who was Martin Luther, and how is he connected to Johann here? Well, let's look at Martin Luther's story. Martin Luther, of course, was German. Again, there was no Germany back then. Germany didn't come into existence as a modern nation state until 1871, after the Franco-Prussian War. It was really just, like I said, made up of a lot of little small kingdoms. And Martin Luther was preparing to go to law school. He was a really smart guy. Was preparing to go to law school, and then all of a sudden, one day, bam! He was struck by lightning. And again, I mean, this story, this is, sometimes history and legend and myth, kind of merge together. So, sometimes you'll read about how there was lightning that struck next to him, or, you know, who knows? Maybe he, you know, we don't know, exactly what happened, but something along those lines. And he prayed to Saint Anne, and he promised Saint Anne that he would become a monk if he lived. Now that's a big uh, commitment, obviously, and I don't have to go into reasons why. Um, and so he did. True to his word, Martin Luther became an Augustinian monk, and he eventually earned his PhD in theology, and he became a faculty member at the University of Wittenberg. I mean, there's a W there, but if you know any German, which I know very little actually, but it's pronounced with a V. Now, Luther in the early 1500s visited Rome, and this is actually when you kind of, I've been here once, and this is, when you go in here, you're entering the Vatican. Okay, the Vatican is in Rome, and as you know, it's kind of its own sovereign nation actually, and it's really cool because if you stand here, like right in this area here, and you look at all of these columns, if you stand at the right place, I mean, there's rows of columns. Of course, they're going this way, as you can see, but then there's also columns behind this one, for example, and there's others right here. And so if you stand right here, you can't see those other columns. They're just like perfectly symmetrical. So it's really nice. So Luther visits Rome. He visits the Vatican. I could have just as well put the Vatican. And what he saw was just he saw firsthand the corruption in Rome. All right, and at the Vatican. Now, what you have to understand is this filled Luther with fear, because the church was his vehicle to salvation. All right, this was the view of many people back then. All right, this was the doctrine of the church, was that it was through the church that one makes it to heaven. And if the church is corrupt, all right, then how can you make it to heaven? In other words, if the vehicle's broken down, you're not going to make it anywhere. So Luther, kind of on his own, he didn't publish this, didn't go crazy. They didn't have the internet back then. All right, just to himself, he came up with four doctrines that, at least at that time, eventually became, in the 1500s and later, became the difference between the Catholics and the Protestants. Now, again, the Protestants, the Protestants went into a lot of different directions. All right, one of these days I'm going to get an actual little notepad, and I can not use my clicker to do this, so it'll be better. But anyway, that's I ordered that the other day. It should come in. So among the Protestant churches, they're going to eventually split her into a lot of different groups. And so, what I'm saying here is not necessarily the case today among Protestant churches. But at that time, he came up with some doctrines that was different than Catholicism. And one, which is very important. There's all of these are important, but the two that I really want you that we're going to focus on a little bit later are these right here. But all of these are connected and all of these are important. So the first was predestination. In other words, it was already destined before time began whether you were part of what they called the elect. Okay? And also, what you did in life and all of that. It was already determined. And so how did you know you were part of the elect? How did you know that your name was in the book of life and that you would live, that you would end up going to heaven? Well, you had faith. It was kind of different than the idea of, well, you have faith and then because you have faith you go to heaven. It was just the opposite. No way. All right, the way you knew you were going to go to heaven, the way you knew you were part of the elect, a sign that you were part of the elect was that you would have faith. Okay? And it was faith, not works. All right? Not the partaking of the sacraments. All right? That allowed you, was one of the prerequisites, all right, to go to heaven. And it was a sign. It was an effect, you might say, that you were part of the elect. Now, the thing is faith in what? If you had faith, how did we learn about God? All right, well, what Luther said was that the only real, reliable source of knowledge about God, all right, was the Scripture. And in the Catholic Church, they use Scripture, but as you know, the Scripture is emphasized much more in Protestant churches. Now, who interpreted the Scriptures? All right. Well, of course, according to the Catholic Church, it was priests. Okay. But what Luther said was that each individual had to interpret the Scriptures for themselves. And of course, a lot of people didn't read back then. There was a lot of illiteracy. I know that, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later because at this time things were changing. There was a stronger middle class that really developed as a result of the trade that had been going on with the Southwestern Asia and Asia and all of that. And so there were more people that could read, but still there was a very high illiteracy rate. But nonetheless, what Luther said was that the priests, that each individual had the power of a priest. Okay, and this is the idea or the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers. Now,